before anything else, before we even know where the "you are here" arrow is, we have to know ourselves. This is Mike from Catholic Treehouse, and I'd like to welcome you to the Saint in Progress podcast, your source for inspiration, information, and directions for your soul's journey back home to the Father's house. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and most importantly, share the show. As a reminder, your financial support is how we keep the lights on in the treehouse. You can support us by buying a book or rosary from our store, or by becoming a paid subscriber on Substack. You can find more information on all these things at saintinprogress.com or catholictreehouse.com. Let's get started. Hey everybody, this is Mike from Catholic Treehouse. Welcome you to episode 2 of Saint in Progress. Today we're going to talk about some very foundational things about us as human beings, who we are as human beings. And it's going to be quite an eye-opening episode, very interesting episode for a lot of you. So I've been quite busy recently. One of the things on my plate is I'm the new Grand Knight of my Knights of Columbus Council. And so I finally acquiesced and gave in. And after 7 years of putting it off, finally decided, okay, fine, I'll take my turn with the gavel and run the meetings. What they didn't tell me is that the amount of email and paperwork that I would have to do as Grand Knight, that never, came into the conversation. Like, oh, it's simple. It's not as simple as what they make it out to be. And in the meetings, it's like all of a sudden you're in like all extra meetings that, I just flat out don't have time for, right? Well, the one meeting that I did go to was there's a state level meeting where all the state level officers and district deputies and new Grand Knights were all encouraged to come, and they were going to kind of go over like the plan for the year kind of thing. Fortunately, it was here in town, so I didn't have to go out to a different city or something like that to go to the meeting. So that was good. But one of the things I never knew until I went to this meeting was that the Knights of Columbus funds almost all of Special Olympics. The Knights of Columbus cuts the check for all those different Special Olympics events that you see, which I think is just awesome. And so I'm proud to be a member of the Knights of Columbus and an organization that supports Special Olympics in such a profound way. I mean, what a great opportunity for these Special Olympians to be able to compete no matter what their disability happens to be. Now, there are athletes with all sorts of different birth defects that compete. So Down syndrome, sure. There's also spina bifida and cerebral palsy and malformed and missing limbs. They can all compete in all these different games. And all of them have the opportunity to win a gold medal, silver medal, bronze medal. And we're not talking participation trophies here. They're actual, medaled events, right? So if you look at all the Special Olympians, their birth defects are broken down into two classes. There's structural and there's functional. Now, some genetic conditions result in both structural and functional problems, like septo-optic dysplasia, which results in visual impairments and developmental disabilities and seizures and hormone problems and a whole host of other stuff. But these people compete at Special Olympics. And all the people who help them, I mean, they can all help these Olympians work around their birth defects to learn to adapt to them. And they help these Special Olympians to try to lead a normal life, with normal being defined as everyone who doesn't have the birth defect. So think about families who have someone in the family with special needs. I personally know 4. Well, they give so much love to that person with special needs. They do anything and everything to make that person's life whole and complete. But no matter how much love is given, no matter how much effort is expended, the fact is that there is a child, a brother, a sister, a grandchild, a cousin, a niece, a nephew, who has a birth defect that cannot be fully overcome. Now, when it comes to our spiritual lives, it's the same thing. We all have a birth defect. It's called original sin, and it was passed to us by our original parents, Adam and Eve. And we're surrounded by those who love us immensely, our guardian angels. But no matter how much they love us and how much assistance they give us, we will still have that spiritual birth defect that will hamper us our entire lives. And that's what this show is about. Now, there are some people who don't believe in original sin. This goes all the way back to the 4th century. There was a monk named Pelagius that taught that there was no such thing as original sin, and that some people were predestined for heaven, and some people were predestined for hell, and that man could work his way into heaven, and that man didn't need God's grace for salvation. Now, Pelagianism was formally declared a heresy by actually, it wasn't even the Catholic Church at that point. It was just one church, the church, declared it a heresy, and it was dead for over 1,000 years until the Protestant revolt in the mid-1500s. Now, Luther and Zwingli and Calvin and the Anabaptists couldn't agree on original sin and predestination, which leads us to today. Today, there are Protestant pastors teaching that Jesus didn't believe in original sin, and neither should we. One Protestant pastor and author actually said, "No passage or verse in Scripture speaks definitively to the concept of an inborn sin nature." Now, apparently, he's ignoring some Scripture. And as someone who's a Protestant who clings to Scripture alone, I don't understand how he can ignore Scripture that specifically talks about our inborn sin nature. So, if you don't believe in original sin, if you don't think that we're born with it, before we talk about Scripture, let me ask you this question. If we're not born with an original sin nature, what prompts a 2-year-old to rebel against their parent and throw a fit when they don't get their way? More to the point, what prompts a 2-year-old to lie and try to hide their bad behavior when they're about to get into trouble? You see, without original sin, we would all be born into a state of grace, a state of perfect union with God. If children are in perfect union with God and too young to be able to reason, then they would behave perfectly. They would perfectly obey their parents. I mean, every little child would be a perfect kid who perfectly obeyed their parents and never acted up and always ate their vegetables and never complained when it was time to go to bed. But even if you don't have kids of your own, you know, everybody knows, little 2- and 3-year-old kids can be challenging. So when St. Paul writes in Ephesians 2, verse 3, that we are, quote, by nature children of wrath, and in Psalm 51, verse 5, several translations, including the New Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition and the popular Protestant translations, the King James Bible and the ESV, have it translated like this: "Indeed, I was born guilty, a sinner when my mother conceived me." We can see that rebellious nature, that sinful nature, in that rebellious 2-year-old, right? But why is it inherited? Why is it passed on? Why did Adam and Eve's sin affect us all the way down the line? So let's go back to creation, before the Garden of Eden. Who was the first created creatures to rebel? The fallen angels. They were gifted with superior intellect and perfect knowledge and reason. So when they made their decision to rebel against God, it was one and done. They made their choice, and they were stuck with it for all of eternity. Well, then God created Adam and Eve without original sin, just like the original angels were created without any kind of rebellion. So Adam and Eve had perfect reason, and they had superior intellect. Unlike the angels, however, Adam and Eve were not created with perfect knowledge. They had superior knowledge, but not perfect knowledge. They didn't know everything. We know this because Adam was instructed to avoid what? The tree of knowledge of good and evil. Up until they sinned, Adam and Eve had superior knowledge, but not perfect knowledge, and they also didn't have omnipotence. They couldn't know what was in the heart of each other. They also couldn't know what was in the heart of any other creature, and they couldn't know what was in the heart of God. That's how Satan was able to get Adam and Eve to sin, to get them to question what was in the heart of God. So, because they were in perfect union with God, and because God is all good and can only do good, they were created with perfectly ordered emotion and reason, and the exercise of perfect virtue. Their emotions never overruled their reason. But when they sinned, they lost that. If you listen to the Bible in a Year with Father Mike Schmitz, he talks about our original brokenness. Well, it's true. All of those patriarchs, there was brokenness in all of those families, and all started with the brokenness of Adam and Eve. It was passed from Adam and Eve to all their sons and daughters, and all down through all the generations to us. Now you see, while God willed each one of us into existence. It is his will and his desire that you and I exist. He did not create us the way that he created Adam. He did not create us the way that he created Eve. It is his will that we exist, but he did not create us in the same way. Okay? You with me? So we inherit our original nature from our original parents. Now, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 1714, it says this: Man, having been wounded in his nature by original sin, is subject to error and inclined to evil in exercising his freedom. So I hate to break it to you if you think that original sin isn't real. I also hate to break it to you if you think that original sin isn't that big of a deal. It's a huge deal. God's perfect justice demands perfect restitution. But what Adam and Eve had broken was spiritual. It was beyond their human power to restore. Only God would be able to give us the ability to set things right by providing a human sacrifice, Jesus Christ, to restore the spiritual order. And in the promise of Jesus Christ, we can hope for the restitution of what our original parents lost. Until then, we are stuck with the effects of original sin. So what does being stuck with it mean for us? It means that we suffer all those things that God said to Adam and Eve in Genesis 3. It means women are going to suffer from painful childbirth. It means we're going to have to work hard just to eat. It means there's going to be power struggles between men and women. Ultimately, it means bodily death. These are the physical effects of original sin. But what about the spiritual? Reverend Spirago wrote this book back in the late 1800s called The Catechism Explained. And he was talking about the effects of the fall of Adam and Eve. And he put it like this: their understanding was darkened. They no longer understood as clearly as before the true nature of God, his loving will, the purpose of human life, and similar truths. Their wills were weakened. Sin destroyed the harmony between their spiritual and their sensible faculties, so that the inclinations of their senses no longer submitted to the dominion of reason. Okay, that harmony between spiritual and sensible faculties, what does that mean? Another way of describing it is by having perfect reason control over emotions. They lost those too. So this is called a preternatural gift that Adam and Eve have. It's not supernatural, it's preternatural. Preternatural means above normal nature. Okay, among all those human beings who've ever walked the earth, only Jesus Christ had supernatural gifts. Adam and Eve, they had preternatural gifts. They weren't supernatural. They're not God, right? So bottom line, we lost that rational control of our emotions. All this is because of original sin, our original birth defect. Now, you're probably wondering, what about baptism? Doesn't baptism wash away original sin? Okay, we'll get into baptism in more detail in a later episode. There's a lot to cover on that topic. But for now, I'll just say this. Baptism washes away original sin, yes. It restores us to a state of friendship with God, yes. It pours into us many graces and virtues, yes. But what it does not do is restore those preternatural gifts that Adam and Eve had. Those gifts were given to Adam and Eve, and they lost them. And the waters of baptism can't bring them back for any of the rest of us. You see, man was created on the sixth day. God created the beasts, and then he created man. So in losing those preternatural gifts that God had given exclusively to man, our human nature reverts back so that it's more similar to the beasts. Now, if you want to see this, all it takes is for someone to be overcome by fear or anger or lust or grief or any other powerful emotion, and you can see the animal within them start to come out, right? They start behaving more in line with, their emotions overruling them as opposed to their rational reason keeping them calm in a given situation and thinking through the consequences of actions and that kind of thing, right? You can think of your own examples. I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole. I don't think I need to go down that rabbit hole. The bottom line is that when Adam and Eve sinned, they lost those preternatural gifts. And so our human nature, the way that we are as a baseline, the way that Adam and Eve were, without those preternatural gifts are the way we are today. Original sin is a stain that affects our human nature. That original birth defect, we can learn how to work around it, but we're still going to be stuck with it all of our lives. So why am I talking about all this? Well, this all has to do with that road home that we talked about in episode 1. For anything else, before we even know where the "you are here" arrow is, we have to know ourselves. We have to know our own nature. We have to know how we think. We have to know our strengths. We have to know our weaknesses. We have to know what's wrong with us so that we can know how to cope with it and deal with it so that we can move forward, so we can run the race, so we can get that gold medal up on the podium. So if original sin is our original birth defect, what are the effects of it? Well, for that, listeners, you're going to have to tune in next time. Hate to cliffhanger you, but I'm gonna, because I want to keep you coming back and I want to keep this episode, reasonable length, right? So be sure to support us on Substack. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that episode 3 where we're going to talk about what are weaknesses that we have because of original sin. So head on over to catholictreehouse.com or saintinprogress.com where you can find all those links, all those resources. You can you can subscribe, you can support us on Substack. You can also find the Saint in Progress t-shirts in a variety of sizes and colors. You can also pick up a print copy of the Saint Challenge, which is great for yourself. It's great as a Christmas gift. It's also really great if you know anybody who is going to be making their confirmation, or if they are in OCIA and are going to be joining the church for Easter Vigil. It's a great resource for them to read about the saints, read about the history of the church, and pick their patron saint. Pick the saint that's going to be with them the rest of their lives. Again, this is Mike from Catholic Treehouse thanking you for joining us for episode 2 of Saint in Progress. Episode 3 is going to be great. Do not miss it. Looking forward to it. And remember, you are a saint in progress, so go out there and be a saint.